From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
Hi, everyone. So glad you're with us today. Oops, can we get some lights on? We look really dark. We're glad you're joining us. It's not nighttime. It's 2:30 in the afternoon, and we're glad you're with us. What we're talking about today, Epstein files and public records laws. And just today, 6 years after his death, Jeffrey Epstein is still making news. We have remarks from President Trump today when reporters were saying, hey, we need to know more about this controversy. Are we putting this to bed or not? And we'll talk more about that in just a second in terms of the client list. Where's the list? Is there no list? There are two different factions here, people who think there is one and people who quite simply think there isn't one. Let's hear what the president had to say earlier today, late yesterday, actually.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking... We have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein.
All right, there you go. There's a picture of Jeffrey Epstein with Ghislaine Maxwell, who's serving prison time right now. Of course, Epstein was said to have, and it was confirmed that he committed suicide in his jail cell, again, 6 years ago. So why are we talking about this today, Greg? Let's talk about Freedom of Information Act, getting records, getting your hands on information that has been sort of under wraps. What do you think about all this?
Well, you live by the sword of publicity, you die by the sword of publicity. And you know, Epstein has been a flashpoint of the election, and President Trump even made the Epstein Filegate, you know, a preeminent issue in the campaign in terms of the secret state and accountability. And so that's kind of how this started. So it reminds me of the dog that caught the truck, and then once you catch the truck, you know, I've been chasing it for years. What do you do? So you're chasing a conspiracy theory, client list, all of this insatiable information, the richest of the rich going to the Jeffrey Epstein's private island. But then when we get the long-awaited files, there's nothing there.
It's like all the air was let out of the balloon.
And they had been heavily redacted, which is not atypical when you're releasing government documents or there's a Public Records Act request. But the most amazing thing is, and a judge and I were having this conversation about a fish that he caught on the wall, and I say, Judge, that reminds me of the story. I tell clients, I've never seen a fish on the wall with his mouth closed. Have you? Well, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, just a few weeks ago on Fox, and this isn't a partisan issue, this is a legal issue.
Correct.
So
now.
Now. So she said that she had the, quote, Epstein client list on her desk and was going to review it and release it. Then, fast forward a few days later, and this President Trump is why we're talking about it, oops, there is no client list. So this is a multi-layered legal issue. How can the person who is the Attorney General of the United States, charged with enforcing all of our laws, supervising all the U.S. attorneys in our country, be confused about whether she had the list on her desk and was reviewing it and go disseminating it? So that's why we're talking about Epstein again. And it's like the Energizer Bunny. It won't go away.
It just keeps going and going and going. To get you caught up on all of this, just in case you're one of the very few who hasn't been transfixed by all of this, let's have a report here that kind of lays it all out for you.
Overnight, the FBI and Justice Department releasing 11 hours of footage they say helps confirm notorious financier Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide in his Manhattan jail cell in 2019, awaiting his sex trafficking trial. According to a memo detailing the findings, investigators found the video showed no one entering the area in the overnight hours before Epstein was found unresponsive. But perhaps the biggest bombshell, investigators say they found no incriminating client list of Epstein's, no credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals, and no evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. For years, Epstein has been at the center of conspiracies surrounding both his death and a rumored client list allegedly used to blackmail powerful men. Attorney General Pam Bondi, back in February, was asked if the Justice Department intended to release a list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients, Bondi saying this.
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that.
So have you seen anything that you said, oh my gosh?
Not yet.
And just last month, while feuding with President Trump, Elon Musk posting, "Time to drop the really big bomb. At real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day, Donald J. Trump." But Musk later deleted that post and others, saying he went too far in attacking Trump. The president saying he cut ties with Epstein nearly 2 decades ago, saying even Epstein's lawyer cleared him. Andrew Dimbert, ABC News, New York.
So there's the very latest on what we're talking about today. And we just, as we mentioned, significantly here, Pam Bondi told Fox News there that the Epstein client list indeed was sitting on her desk. But the Justice Department and FBI issued a memo saying, just in the last few days, asserting that Epstein had no client list, was not murdered, as you just heard there, but died by suicide. Let's talk about the material that they were talking about and access to it.
When you look at it, and this is, when you have requests for government documents and high-profile investigations, assassinations, cases, it creates a fervor for transparency among the public and the media, and you have speculation. What is going to be in these records once we get them? And that's kind of the dynamic we see here. But the significance is multi-layered legally, because that client list could have had names of individuals that were involved in underage sex. The state of New York has a very liberal statute of limitations. There could have been additional charges. There could have been instances of extortion. You could have elected officials in this country, other countries that would be subject to their vulnerabilities if they were subject to blackmail and being extorted. So a lot of important legal issues were tied to this document request.
Well, let's talk about the act of redacting and the public's right to know.
Right. So when you do a Public Records Act request, and we'll talk about that in more detail, but typically information that is confidential, information that has personal identifiers, people that are cooperating informants, that type of information is redacted. For example, if there was information that was part of an ongoing criminal investigation, it would be appropriate to redact the document.
I get that. I get addresses. I get social security numbers. I get stuff like that, even phone numbers. But if there is a public official, a public personality in those files, can that be redacted to protect that person?
It shouldn't be. There's a difference. If you want documents that are in the custody of a federal agency, the federal government, you file what is called a Foia, a Freedom of Information Act request. That does not apply when you have criminal investigations, documents that are sealed by the Department of Justice. And one thing, the pundits and the podcasters forget, there was a significant amount of these records that will never be made public because it contained CP, child pornography. So it's never going to be made public. Yeah. In a criminal case, when you have to
protect the victims,
child,
obviously.
Right, but it's a crime to disseminate it. Yeah. So you
Right.
can't even give it to defense lawyers when there's a prosecution
That's a good point. People forget
of that
that
nature. But that's the dynamic. But when you ask for these records, it's incredibly frustrating because it literally looks like, and they do, like someone gets a black Sharpie and they mark through the memorandum. If it's
Big
an FBI,
bars, yes.
a DEA 6, an FBI 302, and you look, and I've had cases where the entire document is just one big black redaction.
Trust me, we have too.
And if you think about this, if whether it's the Biden administration, whether it's the Trump administration, Department of Justice and FBI want to be transparent, and they are unsealing the files unless it contains information that's attorney-client privilege. personal identifiers, all that. Why does it take so long to redact, review? It was a client list on my desk, not a client list on my desk. I mean, it's either subject to being released to the public or it's not. But what this has really done, and that's the problem with the Freedom of Information Act and the Tennessee Public Records Act request, there are typically more exceptions than there are the rule. So you think that you're going to have transparency, and you create more conspiracy theories. You create more legal hurdles.
Right.
You want people going to get to federal court wanting more answers. But, for example, if you do file a Freedom of Information Act request,
and meaning you,
John
anyone
Q.
in the
Public,
general public,
anyone
you
can.
could do this.
And if it's something that is paid for by taxpayer money, if it's part of a governmental agency, it's not their internal communications, it's not internal policies and procedures, but just, emails often are subject to the request. But they have 20 days, they being the agency, to respond. If they can't, they have 10 days to say why they can't, and then you can appeal that administratively. For example, when you're doing a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI, it goes to Virginia, and they're processed all over the country. Tennessee, our Tennessee Public Records Act, now the Freedom of Information Act was enacted in 1966 in an effort to create more transparency in government. Tennessee beat the feds, but in the race of transparency, in 1957, we enacted our Tennessee Public Records Act request. Every government, state, local agency, if you want to see their records, they have to, not should, could, if it's reasonable, they have to make those records available in 7 days or say why they can't.
You can't see this, but over this direction, there is our assignments desk and our assignments manager practically on a daily basis. And a lot of us do it too, but he's sort of the command center, if you will, and he will file FOIAs, as we call them, Freedom of Information Act requests, a lot in all these criminal cases that we cover. And it is so frustrating to get them back, and almost everything is so redacted. And my question is, how do we ever know? How do we know if it should have been redacted or not?
Well,
is there a process to find that out?
You can file a lawsuit. If, for example, if it's a state request or state agency, that's a Tennessee Public Records Act request. But Lori, as I touched on earlier, there are 700 exceptions to the Tennessee Public Records Act. TBI records, learned as a young lawyer, no, not subject to the Public Records Act request. The media knows that all too well. And some are very commonsensical. If you have an ongoing criminal case, obviously you don't want somebody that may be part of a conspiracy getting records, documents.
Before it goes to trial or whatever, as it proceeds through the legal system.
But for example, you can't get plans for schools and things about that. Now think about that. Now that was some foresight by our legislature. Sometimes we call them a bunch of bozos, but not allowing people just to ask to see the drawings and schematics for a particular middle school, high school makes great. I mean, that's great public policy.
That's a great level of protection.
But if you're listening, if you sit there and you want to know, for example, you got a cell phone, you want to know what your elected official or someone's doing.
With their taxpayer funded.
Well, if it's their cell phone, you can't touch it.
Right.
People go, I want to see the records, I want to do this.
If
it's a government-issued cell phone, maybe you can, maybe you can't, but file a Public Records Act request. So, the litmus test is it a record that's generated by in the custody control of government? If it's federal, FOIA, state, Tennessee Public Records Act, or is it paid for by taxpayer dollars?
You probably piqued a lot of people's interest when talking about the cell phones. When you're filing for information from a cell phone that belongs to a public official that he uses or she uses in the job, it's paid for by taxpayers. Do you have to have a reason? Or can somebody just be curious and say, I want to see your cell phone records?
That's the beautiful part of this act. If you're John Q. Public, you don't have to make a showing on why you want it. It's your right as a citizen of well, you don't even have to be a citizen. It's just your right to make government accountable. Now, conversely, I've had issues with defending nonprofits where people maliciously make requests for information, but that we receive taxpayer money. You got a gray area, 27 shades of gray between black and white. So it's what do you do if you're the government? I've also seen cases where people try to intimidate and harass government officials and ask to see every tax record for the last 25 years, make them available. And, just until a decade or so ago, everything was hard copied, whatever. So when you try to retrieve something from a Public Records Act request or a FOIA from archives, that means somebody's got to walk down the stairs or drive to another building.
And you've got to pay for that.
Oh, and that's
Big time.
the thing too. Be careful what you ask for.
Right.
I've sent out Public Records Act requests, and they comply timely. Fantastic. Well, Mr. Isaacs, there's 9,000 pages. Check, please.
Cha-ching.
Yeah. So you have to. They can charge a reasonable cost for the records. That's fine, but really
what is reasonable?
a powerful tool that you can use, and you don't have to be a member of the media, you don't have to be a lawyer, but just know if it's a federal request, FOIA, if it's a state request, Tennessee Public Records Act request. But I think if we saw more requests of that nature, it's kind of like open courtrooms. It creates more transparency and more accountability.
Right. You're lifting that veil of secrecy. We're going to take a break really quickly. And when we come back, I think we need to walk through the steps of what you can do if you want to file a FOIA request. We'll take you through that and see what you think. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. Lori Tucker here, along with our legal analyst, Greg Isaacs, and we're getting ready to delve into the law when it comes to, let's start with the Freedom of Information Act and kind of take you through the steps of what it is and how you can file, if you have certain questions about something. And we'll talk about, you don't want to be nefarious. So let's talk about some of the reasons before we get into this. People would, John Q. Public would feel the need to ask for information under this act?
Well, when the Federal Freedom of Information Act was enacted in Title V of the United States Code in 1966, it does not have a rationale. I mean, you have the right to access records of federal agencies. So if you're concerned about what the EPA is doing, if you're concerned about what NASA is doing, unless it's privileged, a matter of national security, internal policies and procedures, you can access the information.
Let's talk about what you can't access.
You can't access anything that relates to national defense or foreign relationships. And could be a unwarranted invasion of privacy, could jeopardize the life or physical safety of an individual.
What about records held by state or local government agencies?
FOIA that's a no-go. It's got to be like if it's Tennessee, a Tennessee Public Records Act request. If you filed a FOIA to Knox County, as soon as it hit the desk, it would hit the File 13 waste can. But
File 13.
And typically, what you do, these requests for a FOIA are made electronically to that agency, and then they will tell you they've got to respond, not should have, would have, could have respond in 20 days.
So do you go to the agency's website or do you go to a specific website to do that? We're taking you through this very simply.
It's the agency's website. And what you do, and it's a classic KISS principle issue, keep it simple, stupid. You have to reasonably describe the information or documents that's being requested. You can't just say, I'd like everything to prove that John F. Kennedy was assassinated by the CIA. It doesn't work that way. You have to make a specific articulable request, and then that agency has 20 business days to respond. They get 10 additional days if there's a problem regarding the volume of records or unusual circumstances. And if you're not satisfied, I don't think you're satisfied with the Epstein response, even though it's a different animal in terms of the
There are
release.
just so many lingering questions.
You can file an administrative appeal.
Yeah. Do you think that'll happen in the Epstein case?
Well, this is different. The Department of Justice releasing things,
Right.
typically, this is one of the textbook, it would
That's a
not be
little up here.
subject to a Foia request because it's privileged, it's got child pornography,
Yeah.
Ongoing investigations. It had to be released by the Attorney General's office, but, you know.
And
what
there are
was
questions
released,
about that as well.
questions about that as well. So,
Yes.
But even though there are a lot of protections and a lot of exemptions, you would be astounded at the information that one can achieve.
Okay, what is the difference? Because so many people are turning to Grok to ask their questions. Chat GPT. What's the difference? You can find out a lot by doing that. Excuse me.
Well, the
Right?
difference is this is Grok or Chat GPT will make up a record from an agency. I've seen
Right
it.
now, it's
Yeah,
happening.
Yeah, but this is an actual agency record that you can request. For example, you could name an individual and say, I would like all public records regarding Hope in the possession of the FBI.
Hope is our digital producer. Yes.
And they will give you a response. Either they can't do it. There's nothing here in our database.
What's the timeline? I know you said it depends
20,
on
20 days.
20 days. Even
And,
if you request 9,000 pieces of
Unless there's
information.
unusual circumstances or there's a volume of records.
Okay.
Now, let's say we want something from a state or local agency. Tennessee, every state is different, has the Tennessee Public Records Act request. In spite of 700 exemptions, one of the nation's strongest public records acts, and it goes hand in hand with our sunshine laws, which means public officials can't deliberate in secret.
Cannot meet
You
without
have to meet
letting
in public.
people know. Yeah.
But under Tennessee law, so the mini-me of the Foia, that the elected official, agency, et cetera, has to make the records public and available during business hours in 7 days. So a very tight time frame, or they can deny the request, but really interesting. So if you want to know about a part of the trustee's office, about, let's just say, taxes that were forgiven in the 37919, you make a request and you can see all those records.
Interesting.
Sometimes you read like...
And you're talking names attached to those records?
They redact it. Now, if it's a public record, some of those public records aren't redacted because they're originals.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's so interesting. But
Couldn't that put people at risk?
it could. But even though we have all of this transparency, and you'll read like a great article and you'll think, wow, how did they get those records? And what about all this cover up with government spending in the blank office?
Mm-hmm.
All they did was file a Public Records Act request and say, I want to see all the vehicles that are, for example, in the trustee's office that are being paid for by taxpayer money. Lo and behold, boom, boom, boom,
Well,
boom.
isn't that your right to know as a taxpayer?
From 1957 forward, it was your right to know if you're a Tennessean or not a Tennessean.
Absolutely. Not a Tennessean.
If it's a Tennessee state local agency, then you have a right to look at the documents.
Let's go back very quickly to the Epstein case. We've got about 4 minutes left. And do you think this is it? They're done. This is it. We're not going to hear about it again. We've heard that he committed suicide. We've heard that there's no client list. There are still pictures and videos that are being circulated on X mainly. What do you make of all this?
I think
is it over?
the Epstein records issue is transcended politics and is now going to be part of the country's urban lore, kind of like who shot Kennedy? Was it Jake Oswald? Was it
or more CIA? Castro?
Who killed Jimmy Hoffa? All those things, just because there was so many super uber wealthy people that were on those planes and going to that resort where bad things were happening. And then because they also, again, the problem with the conspiracy, if you catch it and it's not what you said it was, then, no one's going to believe it. So, I think Epstein's records are always going to stay a unicorn. I think
you're right.
It's now that we've got the quote records, that still doesn't take away from this mythical creature called Epstein that put presidents and the wealthiest people in the country on a plane and took them to Shangri-La.
Wealthiest people in the world, Prince
Right.
Andrew, people like that.
So will this continue? Absolutely. And I think if they released every document in the world, they're going to say there's more. But it's a good lesson when elected officials and lawyers and people talk too much. The fact that Pam Bondi said that the client list was on her desk.
What do you make of that? What was on, if anything, what was on her desk?
What do you have to? What do you have to make of that?
I know.
I'm
asking you, when you heard that and then saw all this come out.
You can draw your own conclusion.
It's a credibility
either
issue.
The chief law enforcement prosecutor in the country was mistaken about something as just mundane and innocuous as the Epstein client list that the president asked her to disclose, or maybe we decided it might not be a good idea to make that a public record. So maybe one day we'll do a public record, a FOIA request for the records related to the release of the records for the Epstein case.
I think you should be in charge of that.
Well, I think he's going to stay a unicorn, and everybody can create their own conspiracy. But at the end of the day, there was a lot of bad things, a lot of hurt, and a lot of victims.
Terrible things.
So
we don't need to make light of it.
It's not a political issue.
Yeah.
It's a transparency issue. And the thing is, there's some people, if that list did exist, that could face significant criminal exposure.
Right, and there were victims involved.
And there were victims.
Yeah. All right. That is it for now, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to capture some of the key moments of our conversation and talk more about this coming up tonight at 5:30. Thanks for being with us, Greg.
Enjoyed it.
All right.